Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ask Me Anything with me, paranormal romance author Felicity Heaton. Let's jump right in with the questions. Alright then, my next question comes from Soraya, who asks, are you going to start writing the Angels of the Apocalypse series this year, or is your focus on writing the remaining books of the Guardians of Hades series and book 19 of Eternal Mates? Well, while I would love to write the Angels of the Apocalypse series, which is going to be part of my Her Angel world, at the moment I am focused on other series, as you said. I mean, I'm really invested in writing more for the Eternal Mates series because we're currently coming up to a really big story arc, and I think that once I start writing this story arc, you guys aren't going to want me to stray away from it too much. You're going to want me to stick with writing like the next 8 books, I think it is, in total. I think the storyline I'm writing takes me up to around about book 26 or 27 in the series, which I know sounds like a long way off, but stick with me, it will be worth it. And as you said, I'm currently finishing off the Guardians of Hades series, and honestly, once I've finished with the Guardians of Hades series, which means releasing Thanatos in June this year and then writing Hades for release hopefully later this year, maybe early 2022, and of course the prequel novella for how Hades and Persephone met, because apparently you guys really want to know how Hades and Persephone kind of came together in their romance. Side note, it's going to be fun, I think is the answer. So yeah, after that, I'm kind of splitting my focus. Once I'm done with the Guardians of Hades series, I'm splitting my focus between the Eternal Mates series and the Guardians of Poseidon series. Now, the Guardians of Poseidon series is going to be my series for the Sons of Poseidon. You met one of them in Charon's book, the oldest brother, Nikos, and you're gonna meet his younger brother Talos in the first Guardians of Poseidon book, and then we'll be working our way up to Nikos's book. His book will actually be the last in that series, and I think there's currently 5 novels planned in that series. So yeah, I'm going to kind of hop straight from the Underworld to Poseidon's realm, basically, to focus on the Sons of Poseidon, who, I'm gonna, like, spoiler alert, they're kind of mermaidy. I kind of like, or merman-y. Merman-y? I kind of wanted to write a merman series, and when I came across the idea of bringing in one of the Sons of Poseidon into Charon's book, because it made sense to have Charon asking for help from Olympus and from Poseidon, I then kind of decided that I really wanted to make the Sons of Poseidon my mermen, so I'll be focusing on that. Should have that wrapped up in 2023 if all goes to plan, and then I'll be able to shift my focus hopefully to the Angels of the Apocalypse series. I know everybody has been waiting a long time to find out what happens in the Her Angel world, and it's one of those series that I just really want to write, but other series just keep jumping in front of it. I mean, I think as a series it needs to be more vocal. It needs to kind of wave its hands, scream at me a bit more, get my attention, try and steal it away from these Greek gods, basically. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. This next question comes from Alison, who asked me, your characters' names in your books are generally unusual. How do you come up with their names? Do you have a reference guide that you use? That's actually a really good question, and not one I've been asked before, so yeah, thanks for this one. Most of my characters come to me with their names already in place. They just rock on in here and tell me their name, everything about them, and I just have to write it down. For example, Vale, Phoenix, Fury, Valentine, many of these characters came to me with their names pre-attached, and I just I just jotted it down like I was interviewing them. I do keep a reference sheet, and it's filled to the brim with different kinds of names, both male and female. Many of them with kind of meanings written beside them. So if I'm looking for a name that means flame or dark or any other meaning that might have kind of meaning towards the character in the book, then yeah, I can easily reference that. I do try to tick off when I've used a name, but sometimes I forget, and I'll be like, I just grabbed some names for like the series I'm planning, and then like a year down the line, when that series is on the back burner, I'll kind of forget that I've used that name, and I'll go, oh, that's a great name, that really suits this character that's kind of popped into my head, and I'll use that. And then I'll write that book or something, and then I'll end up going back to this series that I was planning, and I'll be like, oh, damn it, I've used that name. Providing I remember. I always worry that I'm going to name a character the same thing as I've named somebody else, and it's a real problem when you've written so many books. I mean, I've written like close to, well, over 80 books now, and you know, so it gets quite difficult to remember all the different characters I've used, because there's a lot of names in them. There's not just like the characters, like the hero and the heroine, you've got all the side characters too, and I allow myself some leeway on things like generic mortal hunters, or, you know, kind of like bit part people, because there's a lot of common names in the world, so they could just have one of the common names. But for the characters I know are going to be like feature characters, like heroes and heroines or bad guys, I really like to sit down and think about their names if they haven't come to me with one in place. So yeah, I kind of have a reference sheet for them. It's quite exhaustive. I'm adding to it all the time. I mean, sometimes I just make up names off the top of my head, like they're variations on spellings of other names, or they have like a personal meaning, or they're kind of unusual names, like Phoenix, for example, and Fury, and probably Vale as well, to be honest. I mean, I'm going back to those three guys again. Escher, Callistos from my Guardians of Hades series, and Keras, of course. Kind of like, I just think of names that, with the Guardians of Hades series, it's kind of names that sounded the part. You know, they could have been names way back when. And then for kind of other inspiration, I mean, it could be anything. I mean, I could be watching the credits on a movie and I'll spot a name that I like and I'll just have to write it down. Or I could hear a name I like in something and I'll just have to write it down. And I've got like pieces of paper all over the place that have just got names written on them waiting for me to put them into my reference sheet. So yeah, it's like a whole host of ways that names come to me, but the ones I have the most love for are the ones that I've kind of just sat down and made up myself, like Fury and Escher and things like that. So yeah, thanks for the question. Right, the next question comes from Andromeda Andy, who asked, in the Guardians of Hades, you talked about Thanatos. Where are Charon and Erebus? Wouldn't it be nice to hear all about the Underworld's people? There are many gods and goddesses in the Underworld, and I think if I try to bring too many of them into the series, then things are going to get hectic, like pandemonium, crazy level hectic, because honestly, there are a lot. I mean, I did my research when I was planning the Guardians of Hades series, and there are just so many gods and goddesses. I mean, we're not talking about just the big ones here, but minor gods and goddesses too. So I decided to focus on kind of Hades' family and also Nyx, because she's like one of the bigger powers in the Underworld. I didn't want to kind of make things too crazy busy with all these different gods, especially when I knew that I'd also have gods of Olympus involved and Poseidon. So I didn't want to make things too busy. So I focused really on just Hades' family and Nyx's family. Having said that, I mean, obviously Nyx and Erebus are the parents of Thanatos and his siblings, but I don't think that Thanatos would particularly like me to bring Erebus into the series. He's got some beef with his dad, and I don't think he'd kind of like, he's not quite there on wanting to face his father right now. But having said that, I am bringing more gods and goddesses of the underworld into the final book in the series, because when I was writing Thanatos, I realised that I really wanted to know more about Hypnos now. If you don't know who Hypnos is the god of sleep. He is actually Thanatos' twin brother, minus the wings. Hypnos does not have those big, glossy, raven feathered wings that Thanatos has, unfortunately. Thanatos and Hypnos kind of had a big falling out in my world, for reasons which, if you've read the series, you probably know why. Thanatos grew distant from most of his family. He's quite traumatized by something that happened to him in his past, so he withdrew from his family, and that included his twin, which is kind of sad. So I want to bring them together and kind of make them reconcile with each other, I think is probably the best way to put it. So yeah, Hypnos will be coming into the final book in the series, which, to be fair, I know my editor will be quite excited about, because she really wanted Hypnos and Thanatos to reconcile and kind of overcome this chasm that's kind of developed between them. And I'll also be bringing in some other gods and goddesses, but I can't talk about that because that would be like a major spoiler for the final book in the series. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. I would like to include more gods, but I think I'm going to kind of keep it round about what I have now planned for the rest of the series. This next question comes from Julie, and Julie asked me, do you have a character that pops into your head frequently? Well, Julie, I'm going to resist the temptation to say Vale. I know I bring him up a lot. Honestly, which characters pop into my head and the frequency with which they do so really depends upon what I'm doing at the time. If I'm planning a series, then I'm going to be really focused on characters in that series, and they'll tend to be the ones that are clattering and kind of like vying for attention in my head. But I'm always working on something else. I mean, I'm not just ever working on, say, the Eternal Mate series. There's always cogs whirring on other series, not just ones that I'm currently writing, like the Guardians of Hades series, but also books like the White Wolf Lodge series, which is another spin-off in the Eternal Mates world. I end up with a lot of characters passing through my head. I've always maintained that my head is kind of like a train station. I mean, my muse does his best to wrangle everybody, but I've got like characters that are new coming in here, and characters that have had their stories departing over here on their little story train. But for the most part, like, they then come back and irritate me some more. But for the most part, honestly, it's kind of like, it really depends on who I'm writing about at the time. If I'm kind of focused on a character in the Eternal Mate series, say Phoenix for example, then everybody around that Eternal Mates kind of series will be the ones that are popping into my head, and kind of I'll be thinking about other avenues that may lead to other books and things that might happen in those. So I tend to kind of work mostly in like a series fashion, but I do get the odd rogue character popping into my head. But if you're just talking about the sheer frequency of a character that may come up in my head, it's probably Vale. I do try and get him into the Eternal Mate series as much as I can, mostly because I love him, partly because he's actually quite fun to write, and being as old as he is and as powerful as he is, he's normally quite a kind of crucial ally in any book. But yeah, I mean, it's just crazy in here. So there's just like tens of characters, scores of characters just constantly in my head, all vying for attention. So I think every character just pops into my head a lot. So I kind of hope that answers your question. This next question comes from Amy, who asked me, what authors do you admire and or enjoy reading? I really love to read paranormal romance as well as write it. I've always maintained that I basically write books that I myself as a reader want to read, so I suppose that makes sense. The first authors I read in paranormal romance were Kerry Arthur and Gina Showalter, and that was back in my mid-20s when I was working in London. Now, I found those books in Borders on Oxford Street. Borders, wow. They used to have this amazing, huge Oxford Street sort of flagship store that was absolutely fantastic. I mean, I used to spend like hours in there every day on the way home picking up like new manga, because I also really love manga, and paranormal romances. So like I said, I started off with Kerry Arthur and Gina Showalter, and I soon moved into reading Lara Adrian, because I mean her books are just fantastic, or should I say fantastic, since she mostly writes about vampires. I really can't recommend her enough. And I also ended up reading Sherilyn Kenyon and Kresley Cole, and I kind of threw in a little Lindsay Sands, because she writes more contemporary paranormal romance. I mean, it's slightly more lighter, so sometimes it's kind of nice to read the lighter ones, but I always end up gravitating back towards the darker, sort of more intense paranormal romances. I also can't recommend enough Larissa Ione. Her books are amazing. I love her humour, and she writes about Incubus Brothers and Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and yeah, so generally the Demonica series is just fantastic to check out too. And also Elizabeth Norton, she's always on my auto-buy list, but unfortunately her Guardian series, I don't think she's writing any more for them right now. I don't really know if she's writing any more for them. I wish she was. I mean, at the moment she seems to be focused on contemporary romance and kind of romantic suspense, I think. Who else? I mean, I don't really read that wider kind of array of paranormal romance authors. I don't have much time to read, so I tend to kind of stick with my go-to authors, and every so often I'll try somebody new and kind of add them to it. But yeah, for the most part I kind of keep my reading circle quite small, because I have so many series on the go, and I just like to read the kind of new books in those series. I don't want to get distracted from them. But yeah, so I think it's mostly Gina Showalter, Kresley Cole, Lara Adrian, Larissa Ione, Elizabeth Norton, Sherilyn Kenyon. Did I say Lindsay Sands? Lindsay Sands. And I did try reading J.R. Ward, and I really want to get back into her books. I kind of went off her books kind of around the 4 or 5 mark. The Black Dagger Brotherhood. I can't even say it. The Black Dagger Brotherhood. That's a mouthful. I kind of went off them. There was just a book that just didn't sit well with me. It just wasn't what I wanted from that character, and I kind of drifted away from that series, but I've always meant to get back into it and sort of try it again. And the same goes for Gina Showalter, really. I mean, I kind of loved her Lords of the Underworld series, and it kind of went a little bit downhill, and I find it kind of hard to get back into that one. I've sort of left that one now. Really loved her Gods of War series, and hope she continues that, because she's written 2 books for it, but I don't know if she's continuing it. I've not heard any news. If you know, please tell me. I would love to know if she's going to write a 3rd book for that series. But no, yeah, mostly just those books. I mean, I don't get to read as much as I want to read, so I can't really add too many authors to my kind of list, but I do have quite a big to be read pile as it stands. So yeah, they're my favourite authors in paranormal romance. If you have any questions you'd like me to answer in a future episode of Ask Me Anything, then drop them in the comments below, or head on over to my Facebook fan club group where you can connect with other readers like you and with me.